So welcome everybody. This presentation is about to begin. This session is going to be recorded and it's going to last 60 minutes total. Please keep your microphones muted during the presentation and turn off the cameras as well. If you have a question or a comment, you can put it in the chat during the presentation, and then at the end, the presenter, Mariah, is going to address your question. All participants in today's event will have access to the recorded version later, which is going to be available a week after the event. And let me go ahead and start introducing the presenter. First, TISL International Association Non-Native English Speaker Teacher Interest Section is pleased to present the webinar entitled Identity Exploration in Teacher Inquiry Groups, a tool for problematizing power dynamics and promoting transformation. Our speaker is Mariah J. Fairley. We're pleased to welcome you all to this webinar. My name is Cristina Sanchez Martin, and I'm going to be moderating the session. And now let's get started. I will mute myself and let Mariah go ahead and start.
All right, thank you very much for welcoming me, and it's good to see you all here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started. Okay, hopefully everyone can see. So I'm really happy to be here today. And we've already heard the title of the talk, so I'll just go ahead and just jump into the session overview. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the rationale and background for looking at identity exploration and teacher inquiry groups as one way to do that. And then I'm going to share some research that I conducted for my dissertation. And after that, we're going to see how we can apply this tool to talking about native speaker status and other concerns related to that. And hopefully we might have time to do a practical activity as well. So I'm going to start off with a story, and I'll give you the first half of the story now. And the story is, you can read along. Several years ago, I was invited to be a keynote speaker at a local conference here in Egypt. It was my first time. I was thrilled. I felt important and valued. But at the same time, right away, I was also thinking, why me? I wasn't particularly well known, and I didn't have a doctorate at the time. They asked me to speak about a topic not related to my expertise. I had the niggling feeling that maybe they asked me at least partly because I was a white native speaker. When I spoke at that conference, I was the only native speaker there. I felt their trust and respect, and I liked that feeling. It is a feeling I have often not felt in some other contexts throughout my life. And so I'm going to come back to this story later, but just to sort of wrap it up here, basically, what I got out of this was realizing that it is really empowering to receive that kind of trust and respect. And of course, obviously, we all deserve that trust and respect, but so often we don't receive it. And why is that? So this leads me into talking about power dynamics and unequal power dynamics in educational contexts. So this can relate to identity categories that we've all, we're all familiar with: gender, race, social class, native speaker status, and so on. And it also can relate to roles such as the teacher-student, the relationship between the teacher and the student, the relationship between the administrator and faculty, or the researcher versus the practitioner. And all of these unequal power dynamics are linked to struggles that we have with disillusionment, isolation, conflict, frustration, self-doubt, and stagnation. And so obviously, there's been a lot of research over the last several decades, but many of the researchers are lamenting that even though we've uncovered all of this injustice that's going on, it's not necessarily leading to so much change on the ground. And so to transform for educational justice, it's not just enough to know. We also need to do further analysis. We need action. We need something else. And during my research, I sort of looked into this idea of power a little bit more closely. And normally when we talk about power, we usually, I think about it as coercive power, unequal power. Power is like something finite that we need to fight over. Somebody is going to be the colonizer and the colonized. Someone's the winner, someone's the loser. And this type of power dynamic or power relationship really restricts agency. It dehumanizes and it divides. And so I often used to think of power as being something that's bad. But as I continued reading about it and thinking more about it, I realized that we also have other kinds of power that is maybe good power, we can call it. And this is related to collaborative power relationships. And here, power is infinite because we're sharing it and it gets strengthened when we share it. And obviously this kind of power, we're talking about things like powers like care, powers like vulnerability, self-reflection, consensus building, empathy. And these kind of powers can help lead to growth. And they promote agency and they humanize and they bring people together. So I just wanted to start off with that about power. And then we move into now talking a little bit about language teacher identity. Language teacher identity in the past, I guess maybe 3 decades, has really mushroomed into a huge area of research in our field. And we see language teacher identity as extremely complex. This is from the post-structural view. And this is because it's not something that's just fixed. Identity isn't just this fixed thing that's just part of you, inside of you, and then that's it. But rather it's something that's viewed as it's inside the teacher, but it's also constructed through social interaction. And it's dynamic, it's constantly changing, it's shifting, it's multiple, sometimes it's contradictory. And we can think about it also in, other ways. So it's not just necessarily an identity that I'm performing, but it's also an identity that I'm imagining. And those two might not be the same thing, right? There are some identities that I might choose to claim for myself or want to claim for myself, and others that might be being ascribed onto me. And also it's mediated by the context in which I am and the different power dynamics that are going on as well. And so we can see that it's extremely messy. It's an ongoing, lifelong process of becoming. And this has led a number of researchers to see that language teacher identity is maybe more important than knowledge of our field, especially when we're thinking about educational justice. And obviously there's many factors that affect language teacher identity construction related to our own life experiences and different roles that we've had, related to our education, related to societal and institutional norms. And then we also have I kept them as 2 separate sections, kind of. The second 3 are more related to, so we have language teacher agency, emotion, labor, and reflexivity. And all of these are mediated by the context that we're in. And it's so, for example, with agency, agency is affected both by what I believe is possible and what others allow me to do. That makes sense. And then emotion labor is there too, especially the more I struggle due to marginalization in various ways, the more I will struggle with emotion labor in order to try to align myself with expectations or kind of try to compensate for maybe some of the negative perceptions that are placed on me or the lack of agency and other forms of marginalization. And then also we have reflexivity, which is the capacity for self-awareness, reflection, and goal setting. So the more reflexivity I have, obviously, the more I might have a little bit more intention in constructing my identity rather than just sort of letting it happen to me. So the next question is, why explore it? And obviously, I think it's because we know that the purpose of education is transformation and growth, and that exploring our LTIs can help us understand the many inequities and injustices that are going on around us in our society, as well as in educational contexts. And it also helps us understand what resources we bring that can help us respond to these injustices. And with this awareness, obviously, that hopefully will increase our transformative power and agency. So traditionally, over these past several decades, most of the studies, most of the research that, at least that I've read, identity is usually explored in an individual way through things like writing, narrative writing, analyzing our own stories, and it's sort of, or it could even be things like poetry and art and other types of artistic expression, but mostly it's been done individually. However, this seemed kind of odd to me because we know that identity is also socially constructed. So it seems like, how can we really separate the individual and this from the social and from the community, right? And so as I was reading, I also was noticing that the power of sharing stories was very important and could be significant in terms of empowering us and maybe bringing about more of the awareness, solidarity. And as Madris says, women have historically used conversation with other women as a way to deal with their oppression, and that group testimonies empower people either individually or collectively. And so I sort of was thinking, you know, in order to maximize the benefits of language teacher identity exploration work, it really should be something that involves both the individual and the collective. Which led me to the idea of a teacher inquiry group. And this is basically just a group of teachers from the same context that they work in, or maybe they just have a shared interest. They focus on one question that is of genuine concern to them. And of course, it's driven by the teachers, it's owned by the teachers in that group. They have regular meetings, and they engage in focused activities and critical discussion. That's what a teacher inquiry group does. And so applying this to the idea of language teacher identity exploration seemed to be a really good fit. And my research purpose was to provide a space in my own workplace context in which we could foster collaborative power and collective knowledge generation, hoping to contribute to decolonizing our field, transforming ourselves and our relationships. The main methodology, basically, we formed a teacher inquiry group. This was with fellow transnational language teachers. There were 6 of us. And this is in an Egyptian English medium of instruction university. And what we did was we were aiming to explore our language teacher identities together, and also to explore how we navigate tensions arising in our work. And the way we did that was through self-reflective activities, and then sharing our stories, sharing our work, individual work with one another, and engaging in critical dialogue. We had a number of data sources, but the main part of it was the 5 teacher inquiry group meetings that we held. And during those meetings, we engaged, as I said, in different activities, such as sharing a moment of joy in a recent challenge in our work, individually creating an identity map of ourselves, and then sharing an important identity category with the group, exploring a stereotype that has deeply affected us, artistic depiction of our language teacher identities, exploring a significant workplace moment, and ending in an autoethnography where we went back and analyzed our own work to try to answer the question, who am I and where am I going as a teacher? So after collecting all the data, there was the data analysis, and this was through critical qualitative data analysis approach, where I engaged in content and thematic analysis, and which included line by line constant comparison and mind mapping. And then this eventually led to writing these narrative portraits and duo-ethnographic depiction of key conversations that went on during the meeting. Some of the key findings, I'm just going to share a few. And one of the findings was, one of the key findings was related to the student-teacher relationship and the expectations that we have when it comes to what and how we should teach. And some of the examples of what I mean by this, in terms of what the teacher inquiry group allowed us to explore, was that it allowed us to problematize the student-teacher relationship, and it also allowed us to problematize those expectations. So for example, Rose was really struggling with this concept of teacher as authority, that the teacher is supposed to be the one that is authoritarian, almost authoritarian in a way, or at least strongly authoritative. And as she explored this in the teacher inquiry group, this came up in her individual work, but then as we explored it together, it allowed these insights to emerge as to why this concept is so problematic. And eventually it allowed her to feel more confident about claiming the identity that she really preferred, which was one of holistic educator who cares about connecting with students. Another example was Marie, and she has struggled for a very long time with the idea that she needs to meet these externally imposed academic expectations. That these are the things that are supposed to happen and she needs to do them. And as she explored, she was able to realize that by trying to keep on meeting these expectations, even if it didn't feel right to her, it was harming the relationship that she had between herself and her students, and even between the students and each other, the students among themselves, and it harmed their relationship with learning. And so she was able to then move on and explore alternative ways of knowing and share some of the things that she's been doing with that, which she found was actually allowing students to meet course learning outcomes in unexpected ways. And by sharing her story with all of us in the group, it allowed us to explore and kind of ask her more about that and maybe want to try out some of her ideas in our own classrooms. Then we had findings related to transnational identities. And basically, we gained insights into how our transnational identities could be used as a resource to promote social justice. And there's a couple of examples here as well. And the first example was a conversation between Marie and Catherine. And they were talking about how there's sometimes this divide in our context that sometimes arises between local and foreign hired teachers. And they were able to articulate their distress that they experienced as a result of this, and to sort of explore it more and think about ways to address it. And then they started to realize the key role that transnational experience had already played in bridging that divide and could play to continue to bridge that divide. And then there was Hoda, who's a bicultural teacher growing up in two very different countries, Canada and Egypt. And she had struggled with not belonging as a child in either context. And however, she was able to realize that this difficult experience that she went through was actually a resource for her. It turned into this sort of strength that she could draw on in terms of the choices that she makes in the classroom. and that this is why she spends so much time trying to promote tolerance in her classroom and promote self-reflection and promote the exploration of difference and trying to encourage everybody to share their own stories with one another. And the last set of findings that I'll share today is the findings related to the teacher inquiry group approach itself for language teacher identity exploration. And basically, the findings point to it being one way that can promote transformative oriented relationship building and self-reflexivity. So two examples here were that Amalia was, the teacher inquiry group allowed her to think more about vulnerability. And she was realizing that before she was kind of afraid of showing vulnerability, we can say, and kind of shied away from that. But through the teacher inquiry group, she was able to realize that actually vulnerability is key to promoting stronger connections with students. And so that led her to want to show more vulnerability and to try to find ways to promote that in her classroom. And Salim explored introversion. And of course, often introversion may be seen as, oh, maybe this is a weakness. I often hear people say things like, oh, they're really introverted and they need to be more extroverted, for example. But as he explored his introversion, thinking about how it could be seen as a strength. And as he did so, then it allowed him to see that, oh, actually, the introversion allows him to provide more space for others to be heard. And it allows him to reflect more deeply on his own actions and on his relationships. So actually, there's a lot of strengths to introversion. And of course, as everybody went through this exploration, we were sharing these experiences with each other and these insights with each other. And so all of us were able to benefit because we saw in each other our own story sometimes. I'm going to kind of jump ahead. I can actually share this PowerPoint with you all, but I wanted to just jump ahead so that we have actually enough time to engage in a little activity. But basically, the implications of all of this that are related to what we're talking about tonight is that there's potential for this approach in terms of applying it to other contexts. And that's what we're going to try to do this evening. And so when we're thinking about how might we apply teacher inquiry group approach for identity exploration to the specific native speaker status, identities, and concerns. So obviously we've known this for at least 30 plus years, that the NEST, non-NEST is a false dichotomy. Rather, it's a continuum. And we've also known about the native speaker myth for a very long time as well, that native speaker status is not really a helpful measure of teacher competence or really related to what it means to be an ideal teacher. And we also know that it might be more helpful to consider other things, such as transnationality, such as plurilingual or intercultural identity, when we're thinking about, the ideal teacher. But at the same time, native speaker status still continues to deeply affect us. I think, at least from conversations I've had with people and just on my own reflection. And so I don't think it's something that we should ignore. Just because we think maybe it shouldn't matter, doesn't mean that it doesn't matter, right, in our current context in the world. And I'm sort of thinking about, I don't know if this is exactly a fair comparison, but it makes me think a little bit, how this assertion of, I don't see race, I don't see color, for example. Okay, well, race shouldn't matter, right? But the fact of the matter is that it does, right? I mean, it shouldn't matter in terms of who can be a good teacher. And I think I feel like there's kind of a parallel here. And so it's not something that we should ignore. And I think it's valuable and necessary to explore it, and particularly if we can orient it towards transformation. So I'm going to go back to my story that I told you at the beginning to sort of think about how is it possible to do that through identity exploration. So after I wrote my story, I spoke with a non-native English-speaking teacher partner to explore it in more depth. And we ended up talking about power and agency. We realized that because of the trust and respect that I had been given, I also was given this space and agency to share my voice. When we're not given that trust and respect, we have less opportunity to share our voice or to achieve agency. And this is really a painful consequence of injustice. And so then what's the next step? You know, I needed to try to figure out, well, how can I use my story and how can I use my privilege as some kind of a resource that can be drawn on to promote transformation? And so some ideas that I thought of and that we thought of together with my partner were things like, maybe I should really put more effort into inviting input from teachers who might be being marginalized in my department, and make an effort to show genuine appreciation and to let them know that they're trusted and respected. Maybe I can work with non-NEST in terms of building friendships and working together, maybe conducting research together, presenting together. I can advocate for the hiring of people of various accents and inviting speakers of diverse backgrounds. I can assign and promote texts by authors of diverse backgrounds, and a few other examples of ideas that I thought of. And so really, I was trying to think about how can these stories, how can this identity exploration really be used as, you know, a springboard to push ourselves to transform. So here are just some possible activities that could be engaged in, and then we're going to start engaging in one. And these possible activities are, first of all, mapping our NEST or non-NEST identities and concerns. This could be one, and then discussing some key items on that map with one another. We could map our transnational identities and or our multilingual or plurilingual or intercultural identities. We could write a story just like the one I told you about privilege or marginalization or both based on native speaker status. We could explore a stereotype related to native speaker status that has deeply affected us. Explore a significant workplace moment related to native speaker status. Artistic depiction of emotions surrounding our experiences with native speaker status. Poetic exploration of our identity. And then once we've engaged in a few of these, we could use those as data sources for an autoethnography. And maybe the question could be, who am I as a transformative teacher? And how can I promote educational justice? So we're going to go ahead and spend a little bit of time engaging in this activity. What I would like you to do, we might not get to the part where we share with a partner, but we'll start off with the individual part of the activity. And this is a story of privilege and or marginalization. So I'd like to ask you to think about your experiences as a teacher based on your native speaker status. In what ways have you been privileged and or marginalized? And then you can choose one incident, or it could be an experience, an overall experience of when you were privileged and or marginalized based on your native speaker status. And it might be intersecting with other identities. For example, for me, definitely being a foreign white person also intersects with native speaker status for my story. And then you'll just take a few moments to rewrite about it or take a few notes about it. And you can try to consider, who was involved, what happened, where was this, when was this, or if it's over a longer period of time, describe that longer period of time. How did you feel because of that experience and why? How did you respond, if at all, and what happened as a result? And how did this incident affect or shape you? So I'm going to give you, I'm not sure how much time I can give you for this. And I'm not sure if we still need to end at exactly the end of the hour. But I think maybe just write for about 5 minutes or so. And then afterwards, I'll tell you what would be the next step, but we might not have time to actually do it. I'll go ahead and stop you there. Hopefully you've all had a chance to write a little bit and to think a little bit about your experience based on your native speaker status in some way. What the next step would be, but I'm going to have to invite you to do this outside of this session tonight. But please, I really encourage you to do this because I think so much can come out of having the conversation with somebody, is to find a partner and discuss further insights. So share your story and talk together about how might you reframe this story or experience as a resource to transform for educational and social justice. So I think what we're going to do now is wrap things up and just go ahead with if there are any questions.
If anybody has questions, you can put them in the chat and I can read them aloud for you, or you can unmute yourselves and just ask your question.
Yes, Fatma.
Hi, Mariah. Thank you so much for such an interesting presentation. I really liked it. And I actually have one question. You mentioned that in the teacher inquiry groups, like you interviewed 5 other teachers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you did the reflection and you shared stories, and I really like the process and how it goes. My question is more specifically about like what kind of questions, or is there any like specific guiding questions that we can use while doing the reflection?
Yes, no, absolutely. Just like how I gave you guys a little prompt just now. I had a little prompt like for each of the activities that we engaged in. And I could definitely share those with you if you're interested.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I said I was going to share the presentation slide. So let me do that now as well. I'll just put it in the chat in the chat.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, so for example, like with the identity map, we talked a little bit about what are all the different things that we think about when we think about what is our identity. And then I shared an example of my own, so it might give them an idea. And then they engaged in their own. And then there was a little prompt for going about sharing. We had to choose one important identity marker and share why that was important to us with the group, for example. Yeah.
I have another question, maybe a quick one. Did you find that some teachers might sometimes shy away from sharing their experiences?
Yeah, I mean, so that's a really important question. I think, people are more or less comfortable by nature, I suppose, but also depending on the context they're in. And so I think a lot of effort needs to go into trying to create a safe space, a space that we all feel safe and comfortable in.
Right.
And so maybe keeping the group fairly small. But also another thing that we found was that for a few of the activities, we divided up into pairs to discuss stories. And one of the findings actually was that most of the participants felt more comfortable
Yeah.
with one partner than with the whole group. But they were also to come back to the group and share some of those insights that came out of the pair conversation.
Right.
Right. And so I actually added in an extra pair conversation when I realized that everybody seemed to prefer this to some extent. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? How can we be vulnerable with our students while maintaining healthy boundaries? Great question. It's a great question, and it's one that I think about all the time. When I first kind of consciously started to share my vulnerability with students as a thing that I was intentionally doing, it was so scary for me. And I thought, oh my goodness, they're going to think that, who is this? Is she our teacher? What is she doing? But I sort of persevered and with small steps kind of shared a little bit more over time. And basically it was just showing them my humanity, I guess. And I would share different stories with them. And plus in some of my courses, we have specific assignments. Well, I sort of have moved more and more in that direction of having personalized types of assignments that allow for this kind of sharing and self-reflection. And I found that when I do it, when I show it, sometimes I haven't really had a negative response ever. I sometimes wonder if they think, what is she doing? But then I think once they are given the space to do it themselves, they really value it. Like, I haven't really come across anyone who has complained or thought it was strange, except maybe one student who really never felt comfortable sharing. And so I tried to come up with a different arrangement for him. He preferred to just keep his reflections private, which is fine, as long as he's doing it, he's still benefiting. But this is a really good question. Yeah.
Alexander has raised their hand. I don't know if you want to go ahead and ask or put it in the chat, whatever you prefer.
Yes, thank you, Mariah, for everything. I had a question of advantages or disadvantages in terms of doing this work with teachers who might already know each other very well versus those who might not know each other. Either they just have like a thin kind of professional knowledge of each other, or maybe there's a situation where they don't know each other. Maybe they can come from, maybe if there was a situation where teachers from different institutions came together and didn't really know each other at all, would that be a good thing to do? Or could that maybe that would lead to a situation where there's more onboarding and people getting used to each other at the beginning? I'm just kind of wondering what your opinions of that would be.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's also a really important question. And I wasn't sure. I mean, for my research, everybody did know each other pretty much, although maybe, some of us knew each other very well and some not so well. But then I've also engaged in some of this work with groups of people who didn't know each other. And I wasn't sure what would happen. And I wondered, like, are we going to be able to open up? Is this really, how is this going to work? But it turned out that it worked just fine. People were very willing. It felt like it was, I mean, probably because they joined it because they were interested in doing this kind of work anyway. I don't know if the whole general population, it would be the same, right? But I think the ones who joined were interested in it and they seemed very willing. And of course, I didn't make it that everybody must share, right? like it's optional and just trying to create that space. But I think as soon as 1 or 2 people share, more people are usually willing to do the same. So I found it equally as valuable, and it was really quite amazing actually how close we felt to one another in doing this, and we were strangers. So yeah, but I mean, I don't know if it would be like that every time. These are just like 3 different contexts. Yeah. You're welcome. Any other questions?
I'll just follow up on that one just because I'm curious. I forgot exactly for how long did you do these inquiry groups? Like when did you start and when did they end? Because I can imagine that you build trust, even if you do this with people who are strangers to one another. They're at the beginning, they don't know anybody, right? But throughout time they get to know one another a little bit more. And I wonder if that that kind of relationship grows as well because of these sessions too.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think for the dissertation work, we had 5 meetings and it was 90 minutes long each time, but we also knew each other prior. So we sort of came in already having at least some of that trust built up. But in the other 2 contexts, I'm not sure how much I can say because I don't have IRB approval to talk about any other context, but just in one case, we had, I think, 4 sessions, and we did feel that build up as time went on. And in another case, it was only a 2-hour session. And people were willing to share. And I'm not, yeah, but you know, up to a certain point, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you for explaining all of that. Does anybody have any other questions? We have 5 minutes.
Yes, we have.
Yeah. Thank you, Mariah, for this presentation. I was just wondering, like, if we would like to initiate something like this or encourage more people to participate in something similar to this, like, do you have ideas? Like, should we just choose someone or choose a group of people who we know quite well, or how, like, what do you think we can do to encourage people to participate in something similar to this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a question that I think about a lot as well. In my own context, actually, I've presented on this research in my own context, and I've asked people, you know, at the end of it, I asked, and several people said, yes, we would like to join something like this. So I need to follow up on that. So, but I think just talking to people that you think might be interested, maybe that could be a good way to start at the beginning. And it doesn't need to be a big group to start out with. It can be a fairly small group, and maybe try it out and then build on that and move from there. I think it would be quite difficult to have it be a much larger thing, because then I sort of wonder about facilitation of the group. In the research, you know, I've read a lot about teacher inquiry groups, and just from my own experience doing this, I think there's certain things that we have to be very careful of when we're facilitating. And so maybe there would need to be some kind of facilitator training or something if we wanted to have multiple groups. But yeah, so I would recommend maybe we could, you know, send out an email to the people in the department or something and see who might be interested, and then go from there, for example. I don't know, do you have any ideas, or anyone else?
Thanks, Mario. No, I was just wondering, like, how I would, like, if I want to start something like this, how I can get started. This is why I thought I'd ask you this question. Yeah, but yeah, maybe, as you said, maybe sending out an email and getting in touch with maybe a smaller group at the beginning and see how it works, and then maybe yeah, maybe like inviting more instructors, more people to join us, like on the long run. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And we can talk about it further to see how we could support each other in doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any more questions? We're almost out of time.
I am so grateful for this conversation and all the ideas that you're all sharing, especially you, Mariah. You're being so helpful. I want to encourage you all to think about how also the non-native English speaker interest section can support you, right? So if you want to get in touch with one another, this community of practice hopefully can help you do that. So I just wanted to leave that out there. Feel free to reach out. Do we have your email? Did you put your email in the slides, Mariah?
Oh, I might not have. Let me add it to the slides now.
Okay, great.
All right, done.
Thank you.
Mhm. No, this was, I'm really happy to be here, and it was nice to share with you some of these ideas and hopefully start a conversation. If anybody is interested in doing more of this kind of work or wants to join a teacher inquiry group, let me know and maybe we can set something up.
We might take you up on that. Yeah. It's 1 p.m. so we're gonna end it here because we don't want to take up much of everybody's time. And we appreciate you and your patience. And thank you so much, Mariah, for a wonderful session, and everybody else for attending.